Hello and welcome to this session that I've entitled ADHD, Autism, Behavior and Learning, Can Food Help? My name is Jess Sherman, and in a nutshell, yes, food choices and a few other things that we're going to talk about can help a great deal in all of these areas that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk a little bit about how and why. So I've created this presentation with parents in mind. Parents who are either trying to manage behavior like hyperactivity or sensory issues or oppositional defiance issues, or just trying to sort of figure out strange behavior and wondering whether food is part of the issue. And also parents who have received a diagnosis of neurodevelopmental issues like ADHD or autism and are looking for more holistic treatment approaches. So my hope here is that by the end of this session, you'll have an understanding of the big picture, the main factors that are affecting your child's brain development and brain function, and have a few strategies to either go ahead and try on your own or find someone to help you with. So some of you might be surprised that I've grouped together the sort of, mild undiagnosed behavior issues in with more severe things like ADHD and often even more severe things like autism. So let me just explain that a little bit. This is a group of conditions that we typically think of as neurological in nature, right? They're neurodevelopmental conditions. Symptoms are brain and nervous system related. But a lot of doctors and practitioners now who specialize in the area of neurodevelopment are now considering these conditions to be on the same continuum. So while technically they're not, they have some very similar underlying roots. The nature and the severity of symptoms between something like, say, hyperactivity or oppositional defiance disorder or full-blown autism differ considerably. But these same factors, the ones that we're going to talk about, are at play. So like I say, technically they're considered to be quite distinct, but because they have similar underlying roots, it's kind of helpful to think of them along the same continuum. So in order to move forward and really understand where I'm coming from, what I'm talking about, I'm going to suggest a few changes in perspective to you. So first is that we are dealing with a collection of symptoms and behaviors, not illnesses, right? ADHD is not an illness. It's a collection of behaviors. Autism is not an illness. It's a collection of behaviors. And symptoms and behaviors are often rooted in certain nutrient deficiencies, stress, and toxic overload. So there's a lot we can do as parents to help our kids thrive. And what we can do is going to focus on targeting those nutrient deficiencies and reversing them, relieving the stress, and relieving the toxic burden. The other change in perspective has to do with adopting a holistic approach to the body. And the holistic approach to the body holds that a body strives to be in a state of balance at all times. We have amazing compensatory mechanisms in our bodies to keep ourselves in a state of balance. And symptoms, like any symptom, that like the neurological ones that we're talking about here, but any symptom of pain or skin symptoms or sleep disturbances or anything, they're indicators that the body systems or the body functions are out of balance. And so our approach becomes figuring out why, right? What is keeping the body from achieving the state of balance that it wants to be in? So this is how I've learned to approach these neurodevelopmental issues we're talking about here. I look at 5 interrelated issues that underlie a lot of these behaviors. Genetic susceptibility, sorry for the spelling mistake there, stress and stressors, toxins, digestion, and food and nutrients. And I call this a biological approach to behavior, another spelling mistake, because these are biological roots for neurological symptoms. So it's helpful when you're thinking about this in terms of your own child and what you're going to try. it's helpful to, if you can address a little bit of everything at the same time, you'll get further faster if you do it that way. But your ability to do so is going to depend on your starting place, right? What your learning curve is. So it's sometimes helpful to think of it in terms of layers. And that's how I'm going to approach it in this webinar, a more gradual approach. So genetic susceptibility I have in brackets here because I don't think about it that much. I don't address it too much in terms of, genetic testing and those sorts of things. It can be helpful in the more extreme cases of like full-blown autism to understand some of the genetic factors that are at play. But I don't rely too much on genetic testing because we know that we can have a lot of impact on our genetic expression based on the other things that we're going to talk about. And the other things are much more in our control. So the first layer that I look at is stress and stressors, then food and nutrients, then digestion, and then toxins. And I'm going to talk about each of these 4 areas for the rest of our time here together. So here's layer number 1, stress and stressors. These are the social, environmental, and physical factors that are creating stress on our children's bodies. And I'm just going to talk about them each on their own slide, but here's the overview. So we've got the social and environmental factors, and then we have physical factors of sleep, blood sugar balance, additives, allergies, sensitivities, and yeast. So here's the first, social and environmental factors. So these are the things in our kids' environment and relationships that are causing stress in their bodies. And for a lot of people, this is a fantastic place to start. It's not my area of expertise, so I generally suggest that people find psychologists or psychotherapists or some kind of therapist who works with children, who really understands the effect of stress on a child's body. And the most effective ways to deal with this that I have found is through a process of simplification, reducing overstimulation, reducing the number of choices your children have, reducing the clutter in their lives, reducing the number of activities that they're involved in. And focusing on connection and attachment, really focusing on the relationship with your children. This is a huge, huge area. And for some kids, this is where it ends. This is all that it takes to reverse their behaviors. What you're doing here is you're relieving your child's stress, and you're just allowing them to calm down, come back to center, feel grounded, feel in control. And that can go a really long way, especially in some of the more mild issues, like tantrums and opposition and defiance and lying and those sorts of things. Hyperactivity and impulsivity really respond well to this kind of thing. So there's some resources in my handout. Don't forget to download that. There's some great websites there and some great articles of places you can look for help doing this. Some of the physical factors that can be causing stress. Sleep. So sleep is when we grow. It's when we integrate. It's when we detoxify. We detoxify all the time, but a large portion of it happens in sleep. It's when our hormones are being regulated and coordinated. So melatonin and cortisol and insulin, everything's being regulated as we sleep. Our immune system is being regulated as we sleep. So this can be tricky because, sometimes schedules need to change, or, patterns need to change so that you can get your kids to bed earlier and make sure that they get the sleep that they need. And some parents tell me that this is a real problem for them because their kids are off the wall at night and they just can't get them to settle down. They can't get them into bed, and they're up all hours. And this has a lot to do with hormone regulation. And so if this is the case, this is where you might want to seek some help to regulate your child's hormones so that they get into that circadian rhythm and are able to calm down in the evening. So there are some ways to supplement hormones like melatonin, some of the calming neurotransmitters like GABA, some amino acids that are helpful. So that can be really helpful to get your child to sleep so that they can self-regulate during that sleep time and relieve the stress that lack of sleep is putting on their body. Blood sugar control. Here's another thing that can be causing stress. Sugar, there's a couple of problems with sugar. And I'm talking about refined sugar here. Absolutely. That's probably the main source of sugar. But I'm also talking about carbohydrates in general, particularly processed carbohydrates that turn to sugar quite quickly in the body. Sugar, when your blood sugar crashes, and I'm not going to go too into detail about the physiology here, but when your blood sugar crashes, your body releases adrenaline. And adrenaline is a stimulating hormone. It stimulates energy in the body. So sometimes, kids can have these blood sugar crashes, and then they release the adrenaline, and then they're kind of off the wall. So that's a problem. Sugar also leads to inflammation in the body. And we know that inflammation in the brain is associated with all of these neurological conditions, all these behavior things. They're related to inflammation in the brain, and sugar leads to that inflammation. When you have inflammation in your body, that also leads to high cortisol levels. And cortisol is another excitatory hormone. It's another hormone that is, energizing to the body. And that can lead to all kinds of issues, from hyperactivity also to things like depression. Depression is very much associated to high cortisol levels. Not quite sure whether it's because of the cortisol or if it's because we release cortisol in response to inflammation, and inflammation is part of depression. So a whole host of neurological issues can be rooted in inflammation, and inflammation can be triggered by sugar. So it seems that a large proportion, perhaps all of the kids who are suffering from true neurochemical, neurodevelopment, behavioral conditions have trouble processing sugar for a myriad of reasons, which we're not going to get into. But focusing on stabilizing your child's blood sugar can really go a long way, and it's something to experiment with. So how to do that? Well, focusing on healthy fats and healthy proteins over the processed carbohydrates. That's a place to start. Now there's an on-demand webinar on my website that talks about healthy dietary fat choices. So that can help you choose different fats that can be helpful. Combining carbohydrates, when you do give them, with healthy fats and proteins, that helps to stabilize blood sugar as well. So when you're sitting down to a snack or a meal, and you're looking at, a plate of pasta or a plate of crackers or bread, these things that are very high in carbohydrate, mix them with a fat and a protein. So add in some avocado or some guacamole or some hummus or some cheese if you're on dairy, things that are some nuts or nut butter if you can do that. The things that are high in healthy fats and proteins. And then starting the day off with a protein-rich breakfast, that is also very helpful to stabilizing blood sugar. Another stress on the body, additives. So there are a couple issues with additives. I'm talking about anything added to the food, preservatives, fragrances, dyes, anything chemically that is added mostly to our food. Salicylates are a type of phenol compound that is found in additives, and a lot of kids have trouble processing these salicylates or phenols. And when they have that problem, the symptoms are seen in the nervous system. So difficulty falling asleep, waking up at night, extremely tired, lethargic, chronic fatigue, hyperactive, aggressive, head banging, injury, self-injury. These are some more extreme things. Inappropriate laughter. I don't have on here, but bright red cheeks, bright red ears shortly after eating. This can indicate a sensitivity to phenols and inability to process phenols and salicylates. So taking the additives out of your diet for a while can help the nervous system just calm down. It can relieve that stress from the nervous system and just help it regulate. Another issue with additives is glutamate and aspartate. Now these are amino acids. They're naturally found in food, but when they're found in food, they're bound in the form of proteins. An excess of free glutamate and free aspartate, so that's not unbound, is linked to hundreds of symptoms and diseases and disorders, not only neurological, but symptoms across the body, from pain to mucus to headaches, migraines, all kinds of things. So the biggest sources here are going to be monosodium glutamate, or MSG, and aspartame. Those are your main sources in terms of additives, where you're going to find free glutamate and free aspartate, creating this excess in the body. And that's essentially overloading the receptor sites for glutamate and aspartate. On the resources handout, there's a link to a PDF file that lists all of the sources of MSG, and you might be very surprised that it's not always labeled as MSG. Sometimes it's labeled as all kinds of things. So take a look at that so you can see how much monosodium glutamate you might be taking in or giving to your child. Try taking those things out to see whether the nervous system again calms down. Not just the nervous system, but maybe, excess mucus production might go away, pain might go away, headaches might go away, bowel function might get restored. For some kids, they respond really, really, really strongly to taking out the glutamate and the aspartate. Gluten and casein, by the way, we're going to talk about this a little bit later. So gluten is a protein found in a lot of grains, and casein is a protein that's found in milk. They are very high in glutamate. So a lot of children do really well when you take out gluten and casein. It's a natural source of glutamate. It's bound glutamate, but a lot of kids do really well doing that. We'll talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about sensitivities. Yeast and sensitivities. A sensitivity to food or a yeast overgrowth is another physical irritant on the body. We're going to talk a little bit more later when we talk about digestion about this, but right now what I want to say is that a food sensitivity is a sign of a digestive disturbance. So what you're seeing here is that the digestion's not working optimally, and the immune system is responding to the proteins in food, and it's becoming a little bit hypersensitized and overactive, and this can cause lots of downstream effects. So trying to detect what your child might be sensitive to is really important. So the first thing to look at is, are they craving things? Are they craving certain foods or certain categories of foods? Now, sometimes this can indicate a deficiency. For example, kids who are deficient in some minerals might crave salt, for example. That's often seen. But if they're craving particularly high carbohydrate, gluten-rich foods and dairy, these are two families of foods that can be highly addictive. And I'll tell you about that, why that is in a little while. But if they are craving high carbohydrate foods and they're craving milk products, chances are they are sensitive to them. Try taking them out for a little while to see if the behavior changes. The typical way of detecting sensitivities is to do an elimination diet. Now, this is going to take at least 3 or 4 weeks, probably a little bit longer, probably more like 5 or 6 weeks to do. And what you do is you remove the typical irritants from the diet, and then you look for changes in behavior, improvements in behavior, and then you start adding them in one every 4 days, very gradually, to see if one of them triggers another change, a negative change in behavior. So keep in mind here that any food can trigger a sensitivity. These ones are just very common, so it's kind of an easy place to start. So removing wheat. If you can remove gluten completely, then remove gluten, but at least wheat. Dairy, soy, eggs, corn, citrus, refined sugar, and additives. You take those out for at least a week, note any changes, and then add one in every 4 days and note any changes. So like I say, any food can become can be sensitive, can trigger a sensitivity. So another way to go is to do a test, to do an IgG antibody test, which is a blood test. And that tests something like 400 different foods to see if your immune system is reacting to them. It's not super reliable. It's not 100% reliable, but it is a place to start. It can give you sort of an area, can give you a ballpark, can give you an idea of where to start. At least consider removing gluten and dairy if you don't want to do the full sensitivity diet elimination diet. Although, you know, considering removing gluten and dairy can be quite difficult. This might be where you might want to seek some help. But there's lots of websites. You can contact me. So gluten you're going to find in wheat, rye, barley, spelt, and camu. And the reason I'm focusing on gluten and dairy is because when I mentioned earlier that when you have sensitivities, it's a sign of a digestive disturbance. And when your digestion's not working well, gluten and the casein, these are the two proteins that are found in these grains and in dairy, they don't get broken down properly in the body. And they get transformed into these compounds called gluteomorphine and casomorphine. And these are compounds that have very similar structure to opiates, to morphine. So they can travel to the brain, they can get into the brain, they can affect the brain in a similar way as opiates would, and they can cause all kinds of crazy symptoms in the body. Gluten and casein are also very damaging to the gut, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And gluten and casein are, like I mentioned earlier, they're very high in glutamate. And so by cutting them out, you're also reducing the glutamate load of the diet. And so you can see if that has been a stressor on the body. The last thing here is yeast. So I have sensitivities and yeast together here because they often come in tandem. Kids who have lots of sensitivities often have a yeast overgrowth. Kids who have yeast overgrowth often have a lot of sensitivities. Some of the signs that yeast might be a problem: mood fluctuations, spaciness, distractibility, fatigue, irritability, aggressiveness, giggle fits, sleep, disturbances. So giggle fits, I mean, like, you know, inappropriate, like they just seem out of place. Skin signs like athlete's foot or thrush or a history of thrush. Persisting behaviors, like you're just not getting anywhere and the behaviors are just persisting. Consider that yeast might be an issue. Also look at your history. Has there been a history of, you know, diaper rash that wouldn't go away, or thrush, or antibiotic use? If your child has had a lot of infections and has been on antibiotics a lot, chances are, if you didn't do a good course of probiotics, they probably have a yeast overgrowth. So that's something to look at as well. And also in the mom, if the mom has a history of yeast infections, she may have transferred some of that yeast to the baby during childbirth. So just, you know, keep that in mind, keep the history in mind. This is where you might want to get some help if you suspect yeast, because it can be kind of tricky to get rid of. You're going to need some antifungals. You're going to need to repopulate the gut bacteria. So that's the end of layer one. Layer one, again, these are the stresses, the social, environmental, and physical stresses that are on your child, trying to detect what they are and get rid of them, eliminate them for a little while, and see if that doesn't calm the nervous system, calm the body, bring things back into balance. And so here's layer number two. So now we have to talk about nutrients. So we have to talk about nourishing the body. What are the nutrients that are needed to help the body come back into a state of balance? Well, nutrients are the foundational building blocks of our body. And again, this is a bit of a shift in perspective because we often think of food as energy or calories. But I want you to start to shift that to think about everything that goes into your child's mouth is becoming part of the fabric and the function of their body. So we can become nutrient deficient in two ways. We can lack intake, so not eating enough or not eating the right foods or eating foods that are irritating, not digesting well. But we can also have what is called a functional deficiency. And this is when you're taking in lots of good food, but the body is unable to use the nutrients in that food for some reason. And that can be because of genetic reasons. It can be because of lack of enzymes. It can be because of lack of other nutrient cofactors that are needed. It can be a big reason is metals and toxins can block receptor sites. So a whole lot of reasons can cause functional deficiencies. I just want you to be aware that, you can have a deficiency, a nutrient deficiency, even if good food is going in the mouth. And nutrient deficiencies can lead to all kinds of issues. Neurotransmitter deficiencies, poor cellular communication, inflammation, poor detoxification, lack of appetite. Now, lack of appetite is, it's a vicious spiral, right? Because a nutrient deficiency can lead to a lack of appetite, which leads to not eating enough, which leads to more nutrient deficiencies. So that can be a real vicious cycle to climb out of. And so I've created a little package. You can go over to my website. Actually, I put it on the resources sheet, so you can link directly from it there to it there. I put together a little package so that you can start to understand some of the underlying issues of picky eating, and some interventions, some places that you can intervene and help to climb out of that spiral, that frustrating spiral. Okay, so nutrients. So what to do? Basically, you're trying to improve the nutrient density of your diet. You're trying to substitute all of the nutrient poor foods that you have in your house with nutrient dense foods. The fruits, the vegetables, the healthy proteins, the meats, you probably know what the difference between a nutrient poor food and a nutrient rich food is. There's lots of information on my website about that too. Detecting particular nutrient deficiencies and potentially supplementing. So this might be where you want to get some help, so a second opinion about what particular nutrient deficiencies your child is dealing with. But here's one thing you can do. There are some foods, some nutrients that are specifically related to brain function. And here's the list of them here: iron, calcium, essential fatty acids. These are the omegas. Magnesium, zinc, chromium, B vitamins, selenium, vitamin D, vitamin A. I should add in here, I don't have them here, but cholesterol and saturated fat are also really important to brain function. Choline is another one. So, if you feel like this is within your grasp, take a look at your child's diet and see how much of these brain nutrients are in there. And if you don't see them there, you might want to do a little bit of supplementing. Just keep in mind, though, when you're changing your child's diet, this is a major overhaul to their life, right? Food is a big part of their life. And when you're trying to change it, you're asking them to make some pretty big changes. And the older the child is, the more difficult it's going to be to do this. So change gradually, make it manageable. And it's so incredibly helpful. I'd say it's actually critical that if you're making changes to your child's diet, you also make changes to the entire family's diet. And chances are, if one family member is nutrient deficient is deficient in something, the whole family probably is too, because you're eating the same foods usually. So change gradually, make it a whole family event, and it can take between 6 and 12 months to see changes in behavior based on dietary interventions. So give it time and stick with it. So the third layer is to improve digestion. People say we are what we eat, which is true, except really more appropriately, I guess, we are what we absorb. We can be putting fantastic foods into our body, but if we can't digest them, if we can't break them apart into usable components, then they're just going to get flushed through the body. So we have to be, this process of digestion has to be intact. And so many of us of all ages have poor digestion. We're learning more and more about what gut flora does. These are the bacteria in our gut. And we know that we're 90% microbe. We're only 10% human. Our cells are only 10%. Only 10% of our cells are human. We are mostly a mass of microbes, and bacteria, they really run the show in our body. And the most important grouping, I guess, of flora is our gut flora. They are involved in detoxification, in digestion. They create vitamins for us. They regulate our immune system. They're involved in metabolism and weight control, just about everything. So when I talk about improving digestion, I talk about regulating the gut flora, normalizing the gut flora, bringing that gut flora into a state of balance. And when it's in a state of balance, it is a very powerful regulator of the body. I should say when they are in balance, they are a powerful regulator of the body. Decreasing internally generated toxins. So when you have poor digestion, so for example, a child who's constipated and, just can't eliminate very well, that's a problem for two reasons. First of all, we're supposed to be eliminating waste from our body regularly, not only food waste, but also chemical waste and toxic waste. All of this stuff is supposed to be coming out through the stool. And if a child is constipated, then those toxins are sitting there, and they're going to be reabsorbed into the body. They're going to recirculate, and they're going to affect every part of the body, including the brain. So keeping the bowel clear is, we're going to talk about this a little bit later, really, really important. And improving digestion is going to help to keep the bowel clear. And secondly, it's sitting there in the colon. The stool is sitting there in the colon, and it's actually generating more toxins by sitting there. I'm not going to get into detail here, but there's a great, if you're really interested in digestion and your child has really poor digestion and neurological issues going on, go take a look at my Introduction to the Gut and Psychology Syndrome webinar that I have on my site. And there's a real detailed explanation about the connection between what's going on in the gut and with digestion, with what's going on in the brain. For right now, all I want to say is that we need to improve digestion so that we increase the rate of absorbability of our food and reverse nutrient deficiencies. We regulate the gut flora so that they can become regulators of the body, and we decrease the internally generated toxins. So how do you do that? Well, to improve digestion, here's a few things you can try at home. Probiotic supplementation. So this is a supplement you can buy, which is the good bacteria. It's kind of like the reinforcements of the army, just putting them in there and allowing them to help stabilize the gut flora. Fermented foods. This would be the food source of probiotics. If you can learn how to ferment foods at home, this is a fantastic way to improve digestion. I teach a whole course on this, and it's not hard to do, but it does take some time and effort. Essential fatty acids, so the EPA and the DHA, these are omega-3 fatty acids. We find them in fatty fish and fish oil supplements, a little bit in algae, though at very low doses. Mostly a fish oil supplement is where you're going to find that. Generally improving the nutrient density of the diet. We need nutrients in order to activate all of the enzymes that are involved in digestion. And gluten, casein, and sugar are particularly hard on the digestive system. So the more you decrease gluten, casein, and sugar, the more you will improve digestive process. And if this is just getting you nowhere, digestion is still off, you're still having lots of tummy aches, you're still having lots of constipation, lots of gas, bloating, these sorts of digestive discomfort issues, find a practitioner who really understands digestion and can help you with some supplementation, maybe some enzymes, maybe playing with the hydrochloric acid levels of the stomach, maybe looking at bile function or liver function, those sorts of things. And here's the fourth layer, toxins. I've talked about this a little bit, but it deserves its own category because it's a big deal. So there's basically two families of toxins when we talk about, our exposure to toxins. There's the exogenous toxins. These are toxins that come from outside the body, metals, pollution, pesticides, those sorts of things. And then there's the endogenous toxins. And these are toxins that are generated inside the body. The metabolic process generates toxins. Yeast overgrowth will generate toxins. We already talked about when you have poor digestion, you're generating more toxins in the body. And that can be quite a significant amount of toxins if you're not eliminating them properly through the proper channels. So how to detoxify? Well, avoidance is the first thing. And here, we're talking mostly about the exogenous toxins, avoiding the metals, the pollution, the pesticides, looking at your house, looking at the fragrances in your house, what you're cleaning your dishes with, what you're cleaning your clothes with, your mattresses, your carpeting, your paints, all of the different ways that we are exposed to toxins. A lot of kids, I think I mentioned this, kids who have neurodevelopmental issues also have detoxification issues. There's a very, very strong link. There's lots of reasons why a child might not be able to properly detoxify. I'm not going to get into them. There's lots of pathways in the body that need to be looked at. This is where a practitioner can help you kind of fill in that piece of the puzzle. But there is this very strong link with neurodevelopmental conditions and an inability to properly detoxify. So avoiding all of these things, like these chemicals, they're not problematic for everybody, but they are very problematic for people who don't detoxify well. So try as much as you can to avoid them. Some of the other ways that we can help the body detoxify, juicing. So I'm talking about fresh fruit and vegetable juices made with a juicer at home. This is very different from juices that you buy at the store. Those have been pasteurized. They don't have any enzyme. They're basically just sugar water. Here I'm talking about taking fresh vegetables and fruits and putting them through a juicer. And when you do that, you extract the fiber and you end up with a very concentrated form of nutrition, lots of phytonutrients that are essential. And especially because a lot of these kids are picky eaters. They don't eat a lot, or they eat very selectively. Offering them a yummy tasting fruit and vegetable juice, and you can hide all kinds of great nutritious things in there, is a really helpful way to get nutrition into them. Very detoxifying. You have to be a little bit careful because they can be high in sugar because you're taking all the fiber out. So best to sort of mix them with fats and proteins the same way we talked about when we talked about blood sugar control. I created another resource called the Breakfast Smoothie Blueprint. You can download that from the resources sheet. And that gives you sort of a detailed explanation on how to create a smoothie that is balanced in fats, proteins, and carbohydrates. So using these fresh fruit and vegetable juices is a great foundation for a smoothie like that. There are some nutrients and some supplements that help the body detoxify as well. Again, that's an area you might want a little bit of help with. Baths, most kids are having baths anyways. So alternating between kelp powder, Epsom salts, baking soda, about a half a cup or so in the bath water. Also, just as a side note, make sure that they're not bathing in chlorinated water because chlorine is quite devastating to the gut flora. We talked about why the gut flora is really important. And so having a bath, whatever is going on the skin is going into the body. So having a bath in chlorinated water is really not that helpful to what you're trying to do. So adding some of these additives in will help pull toxins out through the skin. So that can be helpful as well. And then I mentioned this a little bit earlier, keeping the bowel clear. If your child is constipated, don't let that go. That's really important to take care of. Go find some help if you need to. Some things you can try at home are adding fiber to the diet. Chia seeds are helpful. Probiotics are helpful. Fermented foods are very helpful. Enemas are really helpful if you're comfortable doing that. It's just, you really need to keep that bowel clear. So that's it. I really hope I've given you an overview. This was really meant to be an introduction to all of the issues that can be underlying behavior in your children. This is what I really want you to take away from here, that neurodevelopmental symptoms can be improved by relieving irritation, what we've called stress, by correcting underlying deficiencies, and by decreasing toxic overload. And that we can help the body rebalance. It wants to be in balance. And we can really, really help by doing all of these things that we've talked about in this session. So again, here's the overview. These are the 5 underlying issues: the genetic susceptibility, stress and stressors, toxins, digestion, and food and nutrients. And this is the layer approach, how I would suggest that you start thinking about it as it relates to your own child. First, detecting and relieving the social, the environmental, and the physical stresses that we talked about. Then maximizing the nutrient density, targeting the brain nutrients that we talked about. Then improving digestion, and then helping the body to detoxify. And if there are elements of each of these that you feel like you can do simultaneously, then go ahead and do them simultaneously. You'll get farther, faster. But if you want to break it down into layers, this is how I would suggest that you do it. So thank you for attending. I've attached a list of resources, so don't forget to download that. Check my website because there's lots of information. And if you subscribe to my newsletter, then I'll keep you up to date with what I'm up to and the courses that I'm developing for parents, and new blog posts and things like that. And give it all a try and just take it one step at a time. Don't ever feel overwhelmed by it. If you feel overwhelmed by it, then get some help, because sometimes it's really hard to see what's right in front of you, right? It's your child. You love them more than anything else in the world, and you're doing everything that you can to help them. And I hope that this has given you a starting point for that. And I wish you the best of luck.